This Saturday we have yet another five-star clash, this one taking place in the light heavyweight division. This is of course Dmitry Bivol making a WBA title defense against the Mexican superstar Canelo Alvarez. I've got quite a few points I want to make, so let's get technical and break this one down. So to start off, in my opinion, we can use Canelo's fight against Kovalev as a good predictor of how he's going to approach this fight against Bivol. Early in that fight against Kovalev, Canelo showed that he's able to deal with a kind of slower pace, long range boxing match that someone like Kovalev and potentially a Bivol will look to employ. And just to help you to envisage this, Canelo, what he'd do, and you can see this for yourself, is he'd slip slightly to his front foot to load that left leg and come off the centre line just slightly. It wasn't by much. And now this in itself is of course being a dynamic target, a moving target, which is inherently harder to hit than a stationary one. But it also acts as a kind of conservative pressure. And Kovalev understanding that this moving into this position potentially affords Canelo some opportunities, he'd look to control Canelo with his lead left glove. And now Canelo's an intelligent fighter. And this is precisely what he's doing. He's slipping to this position, not by much, but just enough to get that reaction from Kovalev. And what he began doing was countering the controlling left hand of Kovalev by using a rear hand parry and then turning over into a power left cross. And that punch in particular, that kind of long range power punch, really paid off for Canelo. And Canelo is not really renowned for being a long-range boxer, whereas Kovalev is, and a very good one at that. But Canelo was able to bridge that gap and make it a lot more competitive because he was able to challenge Kovalev at long range by countering his controlling shots and his lead arm control. Kovalev, however, also being an intelligent fighter, began controlling with the lead right instead. And what we saw from Canelo was a further adjustment by countering the left hook. Wasn't always the cleanest left hook, but he on a number of occasions did land flush. It was a scoring punch, not necessarily the hardest, but it still counts. And in doing this, Canelo, as I say, he was able to bridge that gap at long range by being, yes, conservative, but being a bit more mindful in how he's going to get to Kovalev rather than, Canelo isn't a prolific long range boxer, but he proved he can hang in there with someone who is a prolific long-range boxer. And in doing this, Canelo displayed a great active guard. He was constantly just these subtle movements to slip in from one side of the centre line to the other, setting up his punches that way, giving Kovalev different looks. But he also showed that he's able to register what Kovalev was doing and adjust. However, there is at least one minus, and this was that sometimes Canelo, for my money, was a bit over reliant on the high guard after attempting his offense, and this would leave gaps for Kovalev to sometimes sneak in his straight shots. And we've seen highlights where Canelo's doing all kinds of crazy freestyle head movement and he doesn't get hit and it looks great. It's highlight reel stuff, but credit to him, he has improved his head movement and his defense in general over the years, but it's just not as consistent as maybe you'd like to see at the highest level. And sometimes he does pay because sometimes fighters, they throw out some shots, they manipulate a guard, keep you busy, and then they slot one in and move off. And that's what Kovalev had success doing. Kovalev and Bivol are similar, but they're also different in a few ways, however. I think it's pretty much unanimous. Everyone would agree that Bivol is much fresher and much better condition than the version of Kovalev that fought Canelo a couple of years ago. But also Bivol was probably naturally more athletic and certainly more disciplined both in and outside of the ring. But in my opinion, when I assess the two, I'd argue that Kovalev is superior from a technical standpoint, just based on what I see of them. Both men have a fluid, long-range centric style, but Bivol has a greater degree of speed and mobility, probably coming from that athleticism that I suspect, or that better athleticism that I suspect he has. Forgetting how to speak. Bivol is a bit more one-handed too when I see him. He heavily favours his lead left, and that's as both a setup and a power punch. And he could potentially benefit from learning to vary his setup with the right hand, which is something I always talk about because someone like Kovalev does it so well, but it's important because it essentially doubles your arsenal. Everyone knows how to set up their right hand with their left, or southpaw right with the left, left with the right. But learning how to change that and swap over. Say if you're an orthodox, setting up a left-hand power punch with your right hand is invaluable. It's so important because it doubles your arsenal, as I say. But that's an aside. People who've watched my channel, they know that. They know what my stance is on that. To his credit, Bivol does have phenomenal timing, and this allows him to punch with opponents, especially when he gets them to go first. Bivol at long range, he'll use that jab and he'll throw it out, and he'll keep you. He manages distance so well, almost to the point where his opponents get frustrated. And I just have to wing a shot in, otherwise I'm going to be here all day, and he's going to have the upper hand. But even when they do that and they attempt to rush Bivol, he has a great ability to punch with them with either the left hook or the right hand, which is great in its own right because you're attacking your opponent in between their own attacks or during their attacks. But he's defensively responsible enough to finish that engagement by exiting, so increasing the distance between him and his opponent, but doing so at an angle, making it very difficult for his opponents to retaliate. And that's essentially a win for Bivol because he doesn't get hit, he gets his offense off, and he's out of there. That being said, it is difficult to gauge how Bivol will approach this fight against Canelo, as all of his opponents since 2018, barring one, which was Jean Pascal, have been 6'1" or taller. So every one of Bivol's opponents, other than Jean Pascal, have been 6'1", 6'2", or 6'3". Canelo, on the other hand, let's be real, he's pretty much a ginger Mexican leprechaun. And it was kind of absurd that for years Canelo was listed at 5'9", because when you compare him to other fighters who are much more likely to actually be 5'9", he looked like he was 5'7" at best. And this is no slight dig at Canelo, because it just makes his achievements look even more impressive. But yeah, he's by far, not that anyone needed clarification on this, but he's by far the smaller man. And just to fly off on a tangent, I've actually seen Dmitry Bivol up close in person, and a lot of people, kind of criticize Bivol, saying, I'm not sure how much success he can have because he's not the biggest guy at light heavyweight. Yeah, he may not be the biggest guy at light heavyweight, but he's not a small man. Bivol is a legit 6 foot. And when I saw him, he had flat shoes on. And this guy was like, okay, yeah, he's definitely 6 foot. And in terms of his build, he's not like the most lanky guy, but he's quite a solid and athletic build. So yeah, he's no small man, Dmitry Bivol. And he's a very athletic fighter as well, a very intelligent fighter. However, going back to Canelo, unlike many of the shorter fighters in the past, he doesn't have the fastest feet. But he's done a good job of improving his ability to cut off the ring. And I think he's going to need it because that mobility of Bivol will certainly pay off in this fight. And I think this will prove to be a frustrating one for Canelo. I think the rounds that Canelo wins will be the ones where he's just able to punctuate it with one or two of those big, impressive counters. When Canelo makes someone miss and he just whips in an uppercut or a hook or something to the head or to the body. Very eye-catching, very powerful and quite intimidating when you think about it. This guy's just made you miss by a couple of inches and he's whipping these shots in. I think he's going to kind of win a few rounds using that, because I do believe that Bivol at this point in time is going to be harder for Canelo to pin down than, say, Kovalev was. I think these counters especially will come into play if Bivol opts to trade, especially hooks with Canelo, because Bivol, he isn't the most proficient left hooker. Sometimes he really pulls a good one out of the bag, but sometimes his technique is just a bit shaky and it leaves him vulnerable, and it's just like the biomechanics are a little bit off and his feet won't necessarily turn with him and he gets stuck. Yeah, like Bivol really is He's much better on the straight shots, which I think people can kind of see when they watch his fights. I do see Bivol winning rounds. I think he's going to do so probably based on volume, especially when he's able to fit the jab in between the guard of Canelo, which I did allude to he may be a little bit over-reliant on. The Kovalev fight, just to go back to it, showed that Canelo can be timed, especially with the left cross, which I think will be money in the bank for Bivol, who, as I say, is very active with the lead left, both as a setup and a power punch. Overall, I think this is a very close matchup. Just my opinion. One where I can actually envisage how both men win, but we do have to address the elephant in the room. We have to factor in that this is another episode of the Canelo show. And, none of the officials are going to be doing Bivol any favours. And I do think a stoppage of either man is unlikely. And just as unlikely as that is Bivol getting a decision. And therefore, the boxing meme, the long stand boxing meme, continues, whereby Canelo will most likely win on points. However, I want to throw a kind of interesting hedge into the mix. If you put a gun to my head and said pick, I'd go for Canelo on points. However, I have a weird feeling, just a weird feeling, that this fight actually ends in a draw. And in the lead up to this fight, I've been thinking, you know what? I can understand how both guys win. I do anticipate that Bivol will win a good number of rounds. What is the likelihood of Bivol winning a draw? Yes, a draw is very unlikely in boxing, but I don't think, for this matchup, I don't think it's completely beyond the realms of possibility. And I checked Sky Bet, and at 20-1, I'm tempted to put my money where my mouth is. So, yeah, I'm not going to say I'm going to nail my colours to the mast and go for a draw. But let's be real, Canelo on points is the reasonable bet. But at 20-1, yeah, I think that's worth a punt. So that's just my take, however. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. Leave it all down there. Who do you think is going to win this fight? How do you think they're going to win it? How do you see the fight playing out? Do you agree with what I've said? Do you disagree? It's all good. Leave it in the comment section below and I'll get back to you. Thanks as always for tuning in, and I will catch you in the next video.